I would like to welcome you all here today, including our live stream audience, to the discussion that we're going to have on envisaging the future, European theatre as a public space for an open society. It's a big title, but a title I hope that will encourage us to think with ambition and care about the future we'd like to see and the future we'll work together to forge. To begin, we'd like to share an address from Tamas Szucs, the Director of the Culture, Creativity and Sport Directorate at the European Commission. So bear with us, we're just going to play it now.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to open this event, demonstrating the instrumental role theatre can play as a public space in today's and future society. A warm welcome to all of you. Throughout the ages, art, and in particular theatre, always enabled dialogue. They have challenged stereotypes and promoted diversity. The theatre has always helped us grow as a society. As a young student in the 1980s, I still remember the huge impact of the exceptional performances of an iconic theatre in a small country town in Hungary, Kaposvár. Some of you may have heard about it, which contributed eventually to the change of the political system in 1989. You all know that theatre remains one of the most ancient and liveliest European art forms. It has managed not only to stay simply alive, but keeps questioning society and its current challenges. Samuel Beckett regarded theatre as the greatest of all art forms, the most immediate way in which a human being can share with another what it is to be a human being. Let's not forget the powerful role of artists who can engage their audiences in open discussions around social, political, or philosophical matters. They can spark debates about the past and the future of humanity, about our values and priorities. Today's theatre represents in a way fundamental EU values and is therefore key for promoting healthy, open democracies. Its accessibility and freedom remain essential to allow dialogue not just within Europe, but also across the globe. The Commission acknowledges all this, along with the dire impact of the pandemic on the theatre sector, its vulnerability to lockdowns, as well as the urgent need to support the sector's revival. The pandemic changed our way of life in an unprecedented way. It put many things into a new perspective at a personal, but also on a professional level. Although it hit particularly hard all those sectors that rely very strongly on a direct and live experience between the artist and the audience, we want to send also a positive message. To put a spotlight on well-established artists as well as on young, promising talents in order to accelerate their interaction in person and online, to inspire each other and exchange views about their dreams and wishes for change in Europe. Our funding program, Creative Europe, is there to support your professionalization and help you better tackle the challenges of a fast-changing environment where digital encounters have become so important in reaching people and inspire new ways of artistic creation. At EU level, we are committed to do whatever is possible to maintain our close links with the sector. We launched the first EU-wide study on the situation of theatres in EU member states back in November 2020 during the first edition of the European Theatre Forum. Today, I can announce that the results are due to be presented still this autumn. We hope it will be a useful tool providing a comprehensive mapping of the social and economic profile and impact of the theatre sector, covering also sustainability, accessibility, and gender balance, all being important political priorities for the Commission as well. To be successful in inspiring our collective European project with actions, dreams, hopes, and insights, we will have to reach out to the new generations. That's why the Commission proposed to make 2022 the European Year of Youth. For the theatre community, this means to recognize in particular the role of the young generation. I'm confident that by working together, we will succeed. Therefore, I will be very eager to listen to your letters to Europe, and I wish you an excellent conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tamas. Yesterday, following Tony Sant's keynote, which pointed to the possibilities of in-betweenness, we met in small groups to discuss envisaging the future. I want to return to the points we made yesterday as a springboard for today's discussion, because so much of the focus yesterday was on the last 18 months, on looking back. Heartbreak and beauty, one of you said, mourning what has been lost, assessing the recent past we've all been navigating. So locating 5 key areas we raised as a community, I want to see how we can turn them round to look at the future we want to shape and indeed are already working to shape. So firstly, the potentiality of VR and the digital. When the pandemic shut theatres, we were quick to adapt, to embrace, to harness digital potential in imaginative ways, to reach our audiences and to attract new audiences. Digital poverty, of course, reminds us that we don't all have equal access to the technology, but the opportunities and the limitations of the digital have centred so much activity over the past 18 months and so much of yesterday's discussion. Secondly, the rethinking of the space and the purpose of performance, both through the digital space, but also theatres as places for different ways of engaging with the communities in which our theatres and our companies sit. Thirdly, the past 18 months as a catalyst for accelerated change. What have we learned about how we action change that we can take with us as we move forward? Fourth, who are our audiences? What do we think of as an audience, and how do we work with audiences? Audiences as participants in the making of theatre, and audiences also as just one of the communities that we work with. And fifth, the challenges we face in making the case for why theatre matters. What a colleague yesterday referred to as the economy of attention. How do we prove our worth at a time of competing attention from Netflix, streaming platforms, and other live entertainment? How can we better articulate the role we play in nurturing the talent that then features on these powerful streaming platforms? This summer, as COVID numbers fell, there was much talk about returning to what some people describe as normal. But what exactly does normal mean? Normal, the American artist Taylor Mack observes, is a setting on a dryer. Both the Black Lives Matter and Me Too movements have shown the abuses that can be normalized in what passes as the everyday. Is it normal to have 82.4 million forcibly displaced people in the world, as was the case at the beginning of this year? Close to 5 million people have lost their lives through COVID. Over 243 million have had COVID, and tens of millions have found their lives disrupted through the loss of employment in the professions in which we work. Our theatres may have closed as COVID spread across the planet in March 2020, but the dialogues, exchanges, and conversations that constituted performance making continued. Whether it was making recorded performances available on streaming, performing outdoors, recording new work on phones, or engaging in digital forms of storytelling that drew on the power of the live. Participation and engagement reconfigured. It was to the arts that so many turned as the world locked down to provide solace, comfort, stimulation, and company. The arts offered a way of reflecting on what was happening. And I think here of ETC's Renaissance project, which brought past and present together in probing what future we all want. We will look to the theatre of these very moments, of the past 18 months, the theatre that you're making, the theatre we saw last night, to come to terms with and to understand the complexities of this unerving moment, to come to terms with the contradictions of the times we're living in. COVID-19 has prompted questions of how we relate to each other, how and what labour is valued, how we forge community, and how we think about theatre and performativity in a world where what constitutes the real has acquired the veneer of fiction. And so we look to the future, remembering that the vision of theatre invented by the Greeks almost 700 years BC was fundamentally concerned with theatre as a public space, as an open space, where society came together to discuss the complexities of the time. How do you live with the enemy, who may be our neighbour or our brother, the Oresteia? What is our responsibility to the dead in the aftermath of a terrible and bloody conflict, Antigone? How should we preserve freedom in the face of autocratic tyranny, the Persians? The chorus literally gave voice to the questions of the citizens, sometimes also to their fury, as in the Oresteia. It recognised their presence as active constituents within a political process rooted in questioning rather than accepting. I wrote recently with my colleague Tony Fisher of democracy like theatre as a work in progress. Both rely on participation to function and to produce their effects. Both consist in a politics of rehearsal, necessitating an understanding that they are never complete, never secured, never closed. As we ask what open society we want to create moving forward, theatre becomes a space through which we forge these conversations, a space of dialogue. Theatron in Greek, of course, was the place for viewing. But today, I would argue that theatre has to be an active space of engagement, a space of forging. Theatre as a place to show what is possible. Do we see theatre as a site of safety? What does risk mean when COVID is still so present and so real? And in an age where social media provides instantaneous judgment, how can we work to ensure that theatre becomes a space of discerning thought and reflective adjudication, a space for listening, a space for debate, a space for democracy? In his opening address, Tamas spoke of the importance of theatre as a place to challenge and ask difficult questions, a space of dialogue where we debate our values, a place which can help us to reflect and grow. Before I introduce my fellow panellists, I would like to introduce a very special guest who's also going to address us. Jose Herrera, Maltese Minister for the National Heritage, the Arts and Local Government. Welcome to you. Please come and address us before we begin our panel discussion.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your kind invitation to attend this morning. During these unprecedented times we're living in, it's essential that we regroup and re-strategize for the benefit of the sector and even more for our communities. It brings me great pleasure to see that through this first in-person conference in such a long time, we can work towards our common objective to reflect and discuss on future common goals in the European theatre sector. The COVID pandemic has brought with it many changes which we all had to adapt to. However, it has also shown us how together we can work towards the common good for society. The current scenario has given us the opportunity to synergize our past and present experiences so that together we can think of new sustainable ways within the culture and creative sector, leading to more accessibility, professionalism within the sector, and increase in accessibility for our respective communities. As a government, we have strived to continue working towards the benefit of our artists and creative professionals as we aim to keep on moving forward. Just last week, we have announced our budgetary measures for 2022, whereby amongst many other incentives, we announced that the total government investment in the cultural and creative sectors for 2022 is estimated to be 110 million euros, a 13.5% increase over that in 2021. This is deemed definitely as a breath of fresh air, especially during these past couple of years where everyone was impacted with the pandemic. This is all being done to continue strengthening the culture sector in order to continue building on what has been done in the past couple of years. We wanted to continue to increase sustainability and professionalism amongst our artists. In fact, as from 2022, a reduced rate of 7.5% income tax will be introduced for artists with economic activity in the sector. This is something our artists had been long striving for, thus incentivizing artists to engage professionally in the arts. At the height of the pandemic, we worked towards providing culture and the arts into our communities' homes, thanks to initiatives and hybrid events by our public cultural organizations. Through our newly introduced budgetary measures, we also aim to continue strengthening these public cultural organizations who keep on representing our society's cultural fabric through accessible cultural events aimed at everyone all throughout the year. This has brought about a total of 35.8 million euros to be invested towards Arts Council Malta's funding programs, initiatives and public cultural organizations, which translates into a 12.4% increase over the budget allocated for 2021. This is all testament to the hard work being done to continue striving towards excellence within the sector and for the cultural and creative industries. Moreover, a total investment of 26 million euros will be allocated to public culture organizations within Arts Council Malta's remit, yet another increase of 7% from last year's budget, and there will also be a 45% increase from the 2021 budget for the Arts Council Malta's funding programs for 2021, bringing it to a total allocation of 5 million euros. 1 million euros from these funds will serve as a new allocation to be directed towards a scheme administered by Arts Council aimed to support independent artistic projects. These 5 million euros in funds will be available for our artists and creative professionals to continue furthering their artistic careers. As a government, we continue to strive to work towards the benefit of our artists and the culture and creative sector. And it is through initiatives such as this conference that we can continue to learn and listen to what is needed within the sector so that we continue working towards our common goal to strengthen and make culture and the arts more accessible. I thank you once again for your invitation to participate this morning, and I wish you a fruitful rest of the conference full of interesting discussions and debates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Herrera. Before I introduce my fellow panelists, I want to share with you 3 letters. These letters are read to us by pupils from Germany and Malta, but they were formulated and conceived as collective endeavors by young people from Albania, Austria, Bosnia, Romania, Germany, Nigeria, and Serbia who live in Craiova, Berlin, and Graz. These are thoughts on the future as well as their discussion of the Europe that they see and experience. And I want us to take a few minutes here to listen to what they're sharing with us. Thank you. Let's play the letters.
We're 15 to 18 years old. We're funny and outgoing and smart, political and old enough to vote. We're tall and handsome and proud to write this letter. We enjoy playing video games or sleeping 8 hours a day. We like politics, music and sports, fashion in different languages. We're open to new things and places.
When we think about Europe, we see a map of Europe with Europe written on it. We also see our home country, buildings that are very old but beautiful. We think about great places and adventures and good food. When we think about Europe, we think about many people with different points of view who can achieve a lot if working together. We think about cultural diversity and people interacting with each other. But we also see countries that should try harder to stick together and build a stronger Europe. We see so much different standards and systems, for example, in education. Too many injustice and problems that has to be addressed.
We're young, and being young means that the freedom to live our lives with our friends and not to have many or any responsibilities. We have opportunities and time to decide what we want to do with our lives. We want to relax, study, try everything, learn many things, and have time for ourselves. But being young comes with some disadvantages too. We have fewer rights, and our feelings aren't taken seriously. Sometimes we are not treated with respect.
Even a lot of people don't take us seriously, and we maybe don't understand much of everything about Europe. We want to talk about some problems we see. We really don't get Europe's ignorance to racism, colonialism, the complete ignorance of poor people. Why there are still so many dumb or corrupt people who can decide about important things. For us, that's the cause of bad education, why too much money is spent on things we don't really need. This is probably a reason why the politics of Europe are so inefficient. They take enormous amounts of time to make such simple decisions and by that destroy opportunities. Like doing something against the climate change or focus on social things instead of economic growth.
While we're at it, what makes me really angry when we think about the world we live in is racism, our school system, climate change, discrimination, starvation, oppression, exploitation, poverty, and corrupt regimes. We're angry that people do not realize that they have the opportunities to gain power and lead to progress. Sorry, we are not angry people, but we try not to be angry when we look at the world. But we will live quite long here, and to be honest, want to see it filled with kind people and no judgment. We don't have to be best friends, but at least don't attack each other. We want to see a world with schools that really helps children to find what they want in life, where everybody is conscious about their potential. Can we make this happen?
Dear reader, do whatever you want with this letter. School is out and we are leaving. To study more or go to the park with our friends or to cook lunch for our children.
Sincerely, Young Europe.
To whom it may concern. Hello, this is Young Europe speaking.
We are human beings from Austria, Serbia, Bosnia, Germany, Romania, and Albania. Some are activists trying to preserve humanity and nature. Some are persons who like music and sports. Some are not proud to be part of the EU, and some are feminists.
When we think about Europe, we see a trading community and diverse people and religions living on the same continent. Countries that have a lot of potential to be new developed countries, managing problems like climate change, but do not really use it. Countries that are rich because of colonialism, and countries that have good healthcare and school system. Countries in which freedom is an important value. Countries you are able to travel, which have the same currency and offer the opportunity to discover different landscapes and cultures. We see people trying to be open-minded.
When we think about Europe, we also see a bunch of problems our generation must solve because of the ignorance of previous generations. But what we don't understand about Europe is how its countries ignore problems or sometimes even create new ones. How can we let people die at our borders, accept dictatorship in our union, and still strut ourselves with our human rights and democracy? How can we praise our equality even though there is none? How can we let corruption happen repeatedly, and how are there so many countries that hate each other? How come that Europe doesn't do more against climate change and help poor countries develop?
The Europe we want to see in the future is one where everyone accepts all sexualities and genders, and where refugees are welcome. A Europe where humans care about each other and the nature which is necessary for a good and safe life. An alliance that isn't just an economic organization, but an institution that fights all problems in the world. An alliance powerful and autonomous enough to, for example, stop China from mass murdering the Uyghurs, as well as to protect our environment and make the world a fair place with equal opportunities for the next generations.
Sincerely, Young Europe.
Hello, this is Young Europe speaking. We are human beings from Craiova, Romania, Berlin, Germany, and Graz, Austria. We are people from the society who deserve the right to vote. Some of us are funny, outgoing, some like to play video games. Some may describe themselves as scholars of the world and pieces of wood found adrift in a river of life.
Some of us already envision a certain future for ourselves, such as becoming a successful architect. But some of us may argue we are not in the world to live up to somebody else's expectations. When we think of Europe, we don't only see an economic association, but also different cultures, traditions, religions, languages, and countries. We see a multicultural society enriched by different mindsets and perspectives. As different as we may be, we are all connected by living on the same continent.
There are quite a few things we don't understand about Europe. What's up with our colonial history and our modern colonial tendencies? Where's the evaluation of what happened and what we are still doing? Why does Europe financially support war? And why don't we do our part and do more in helping growing and developing countries?
When looking at people who got it worse than we do, and the gap between rich and poor, we ask ourselves, who does Europe actually care for? The Europe we want to see in the future is a Europe of independence and unity. The life of Europeans will be filled with charity and not hate.
The Europeans will have to learn to live together as a multicultural society, to exchange the values of the equal footing, to live together and to embrace differences.
The Europe of the future we want to see is a Europe of good communication between countries, languages, and cultures. We want to see a fair economy and political representatives who care about the economically weaker people.
Please, spread love, spread peace. Don't accept everything and just take it all for granted. Dear listeners, do whatever you want with this letter. School is out and we are moving on to study, or to go out with friends, or to make lunches for our siblings. Sincerely, Young Europe.
So listening to these letters, their provocations, their pleas and their pledges, thank you, resonate with the letters written by the young ambassadors at the Young Europe Festival last year. Together, I think, these are a really important set of documents that invite us to think about how we act and when we act. And I just wanted to spend a minute or two pulling together some of the key headlines of both sets of letters as we consider what these young people are telling us today to ensure that their thoughts guide and shape our discussion today. Firstly, the idea of action as opposed to rhetoric. Doing, the Cuban poet José Martí observed, is the best way of saying. Participants speak about our duty to intervene. Change starts with the self, but how is the self formed, one of the authors asks, in an era where polarization, hate, and virtue posturing are endemic on social media? Secondly, these young people remind us of our responsibilities. Tomorrow, as we all leave the ETC conference here in Malta, the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, begins in Glasgow. Environmental sustainability, a key concern flagged by so many of the young ambassadors and a regular trope across all three of the letters presented here today for the first time. The planet is on fire, ice is melting, and the ecosystem that sustained biodiversity is collapsing. What are we going to do? These letters speak of a generation that feels that they're inheriting a calamity not of their making. As such, it's not about what we'll say, but what we'll do. As one of the letters articulates so clearly, how do we use our potential to be better? Thirdly, racism, inequality, and the legacy of colonialism remains a potent discontent. The need to face up to abuse, to recognize that refugees and migrants are dying on our shores. How do we embody our value system? Too many injustices and problems that have to be addressed, the third letter notes. And fourthly, what is Europe? There is a clear vision of Europe shared by the authors of all three of the letters that you've heard today, and that's centered on values. A Europe that's not primarily about monetary union or economic alliances, but rather a space of multilingualism and plurality, where past abuses are acknowledged and addressed. A Europe of good communication, as the third letter just mentioned. And democracy. A number of the interventions observe that democracy is not everywhere. We can't assume it as a given. We have to keep working at it. The need to work together and find solidarity runs through so many of the letters. When we think about Europe, one of the letters notes, we think about many people coming together with many points of view who can achieve a lot if working together. I come to Malta from the UK, a place that voted in 2016 to leave the EU, to go it alone, to close borders. My own family, exiles from a civil war, sought solace and protection in the UK. When my father arrived in Britain in 1937 as a child refugee, he found asylum. Would this be possible in 2021? I don't know. And so today, as we ask a series of questions about the theatre we want to make and what theatres can do for Europe and what Europe can do for theatres, we do so recognising Europe as a space of porous boundaries, a space that we forge actively and dynamically with due care to people and the planet, the shared space of performance as a site of moral force. So what should we be doing? How do we listen to what our young people are telling us? And how do we work with them to forge a future that feels more equitable and with cultural values at the fore? So to discuss these issues, I'm joined by the theatre director and playwright Bashar Murkus, the founder, member and artistic director of Palestine's Kashabi Theatre, the playwright and the director Janina Carbonariu, the artistic director of Teatrul Tineretulio, the Theatre of Youth, and the theatre festival Piatra Neamt, Romania. Heidi Wiley, who needs no introduction, ETC's executive director, and Serge Rangoni, the ETC president, and as you all know, the general manager and artistic director of Belgium's Théâtre de Liège. Welcome to you all. Before I ask Serge to kick off the discussion, we anticipate talking for about 45 minutes before opening things out to questions and comments. But we'll be asking all of you to focus your questions and points on actions for the future. We know that obviously our future is shaped by the present we're living and the past we've just been living, but we want concrete possibilities moving forward. And we hope that you'll share those thoughts, not just with us today, but also with Heidi and Teresa as they plan ahead. We'll also be taking questions from our live streamed audiences. So if you see me being passed pieces of paper, it's not nothing ominous. They are questions from our colleagues in the digital sphere. So Serge, over to you. What really matters to you at the moment, and what should we be doing?
One of the most important things is that with the COVID, we discover it was already an ongoing question, but the question of local, national, international, it's really, I think, one of the most important topics today. We have heard in the past days some experiences from our members during the COVID balcony, to play on balcony that Dubravka told last day. I know also in Oslo when they had a new venue in a neighborhood very different with a very huge cultural background. It's some answer. Open air. You spoke about open air performances. We have done in Liège also a project called Place aux Artistes. It was an open call, and suddenly we found that there are in the city a lot of people dancing, doing a lot of things, a lot of dance, obviously not professional, but some of them, they are in a way to be professional. So all these things that can connect to the city is important. And that's led me to think at one French sociologist, Michel Maffezoli, and because he spoke from already some years, he write about the urban tribes. And today we are all in Europe, more or less, obviously, probably more in Berlin than in Viana do Castelo. But we are all facing urban tribes, and with the COVID, with all the security systems that in all different countries that appears, it's more and more complicated to find these urban tribes. And I think that we have to focus on how can we connect with all these specific tribes in the city. Not only cultural, but religious, but also different thought. And for me, this is the most important thing that we have to face. Theaters has to face now.
So connectivity with our audiences and very much rooted in the communities in which we sit.
Yes, but this is also something very strange, because we all here, at least people from my age, we thought always that theaters, it's a place that assembles everybody, young and old and different culture, but it's not so. It's not so. And I think that we have to change, and probably in the programming to focus on different kind of community, because you cannot speak in the same way to all the community of a city. This is not possible. Yeah. This is an utopia. It's good to go to these, but it's not the case.
So recognizing the different needs of those communities.
Exactly.
So rather than community as a homogenous entity, breaking down and recognizing there are different communities with different needs that must be addressed.
Yes, I know that this is a very, can be some topic. When I speak about this with my colleague in France, they are, because it's the Republic, everything, but it's an utopia, it's not the reality. So probably we have to be more focused on the reality than on the utopia. Maybe to go to the utopia, but to focus on the reality of the things.
So the idea of however much we may aspire to a utopia, recognizing that the inequalities on the ground are still pronounced and we need to deal with those in very direct ways. So how do we deal with those national and regional tensions? I mean, both of you work on the ground with companies with those tensions. How do you address them?
Well, good morning. I'm coming from a very different situation, let's say, and it's very interesting to be talking about in this panel and looking from a different point of view, let's say. We are working at Khashabi Theatre that it's a Palestinian independent theatre. We call that we're coming from Palestine, but to be politically correct, we are coming from Haifa, what's called Israel now. So we are living under occupation. And when we are thinking about with whom we talk and how we talk and why we make theater, it's obviously clearer than maybe here, because there, when you are into a situation that you know that you are fighting to save your identity, fighting to save your story, your narrative, to talk with people in the way that you want to talk with your people. So the question of with whom you are talking and why you are talking with, it's something that you need to choose. It's your basic question. It's your first question. And of course, we as a theater makers, we love to talk with everyone. But then, when you find yourself in a situation that a full state, full occupation, asks you to just react to it all the time, and to be fast as the wars that they are doing, you find yourself in a way that you need to choose to really to take your actions, the responsibility of your actions. It was wonderful how they're talking about that, but it's absolutely about taking the responsibility of why you are making theater. And this is the basic question that each time I'm thinking about any question, thinking about theater, I really ask myself to remind it why I'm making theater. It's the first question and the most important.
Yeah. Do you ask yourself the same, Janina? Why do I do it?
Yes, and it's working?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, why and for whom? That's very, it became even more important than before, because actually all the problems that we see now so clear with the COVID situation, they were there before. They were existing. It's just that now they are really hitting us. So in front of this global problem, we have to give a global, let's say an international answer, but in the same time to realize where we work and to the first audience we are speaking to. So the first audience I'm speaking now is the audience in this small city, Piatra Neamț. And it is a city that was, how do you say, challenged during all this time. The hospital, during the pandemic, the hospital burned. It's a post-industrial place with a lot of, how do you say, people who emigrated to West. So it's a very special community. So, and a community that suffered, like many others, in this time. So you really have to see how you enter a dialogue now. And what we managed to do was to create these outdoor performances, which are actually site-specific. We don't just take shows and move it outside, but we try to create a dialogue with the architecture of the theater and also with the whole city. So, for instance, we had this performance where we tried to make the theater visible. So I think that's the, how do you say, the challenge now, to become even more visible than before for the community and to see the community, like you said before, to realize how visible are the other communities.
It's a really interesting point because Heidi, I mean, you're running an organization that goes across national boundaries. How do you facilitate that focus on the local, which everybody's talking about being so incredibly important? This idea of theatres also going out of the building and taking their presence, what used to be called outreach. But in many ways, I think the theatre of the future is all outreach. It's not a little bit of what you do. It's the focus of what you do, is ensuring that it has a presence across a much broader landscape.
I think what's important for us here as European Theatre Network is in coming together to hear these various approaches on how you work, how you deal with your individual challenges, your ideas on putting on a program that reaches the audiences that is in your city. And I think that's also the importance that the network had before, also when we stood there in declaring theatre is based on democratic principles. It's there to federate also social justice and to go beyond just the artistic idea and the artistic visions that are happening on stage, but really be an open space for engagement. And when the pandemic came in and hit, I think it was very quickly clear that culture is essential for the mental well-being for individuals, but also for the well-being of society. And also what we realized then in coming together, in remaining connected, that this was very helpful, and it showed us also the strength that we as public theaters in Europe had in comparison to other theaters in the other parts of the world. And I think that's something that we realized in this point, and something to be conscious about, proud, and also to value this. Because at the same time, we realized how fragile, how vulnerable the system, our structures are in. No one knows how much longer we could have sustained this situation if the vaccination wouldn't have come so quickly. So what we need is, and we know, we've heard it this morning from Tamas, Szucs, also the Commissioner Gabriel, the Commissioner for Culture in the Commission, they all say and believe and are also convinced of the power of theaters as public agoras where traditions for people to come together to reflect on society, to also formulate their wishes and to pave the way for the European way of life, how it's been mentioned, is made, that this is important. But what we need to do is putting policy into practice and to make sure that the European dimension of the work, that we are connected with each other, that this remains. Because, let's be honest, the European dimension in your work, it's not the first priority on national level. It's the only priority for Europe. And this is what we need to make sure, that this will be strengthened and better supported and upscaled with more investment and also a long-term commitment. Because if that's not there, for European theaters to remain those public stages where we have an open discourse on different multilingual voices and intercultural perspectives, that's not a given. Like you say, democracy needs to be nourished on a daily basis. And also, the crisis showed us how complex the European theater system is as an ecosystem, because obviously we're also talking about economics and money and finances. And it showed us the interconnectivity of our sector with the audiovisual, film, television, gaming, design, music, literature, and the dance sector, but that we have our own specification that needs the same recognition and valorization as other cultural and creative sectors. And that the European institutions need to underline the support that they need in this with the member states. We observe increasing tendencies of national governments to cut funds for European cross-border activities. And international collaboration is key to overcome the crisis and to build the future. So I think the role of networks in coming together to discuss all those issues is more crucial than ever before. It's really important. We are here to connect, to represent, and to stir change within the sector, to make sure that we can progress and take agency for European theaters also to foster all the various issues that the young people mentioned, that you also said, sustainable development and resilience for our sector, to step in the future, to increase the engagement with audience and development, to help our sector thrive and to create the post-COVID world again. And compared to other sectors, I think also one thing we need to be aware of, because it's really nice to make all those speeches, but what are we talking about? European cultural networks are micro organizations, tiny organizations that are as vulnerable as the entire sector. So also, we are expected to make a huge impact, but for this to happen, we need a long-term commitment to be able to do this. And Europe needs to make this stand also in working stronger side on side with us in this endeavor, because we have plans. We've outlined them yesterday on how we envision our future and how theater's role in society is there, that there's a value-based leadership through artistic visions that we envision. Sustainability is in our agendas. Artistic collaboration is key, and we need to make the change of paradigms to confront the COVID crisis to come out of this.
I want to pick up on a couple of things you said, Heidi, and invite Janina to come in, because so many of the young people, the challenges we're facing, we're talking about nationalism, making, has Europe. We have to understand that Europe doesn't have a shared value system. There are challenges to democratic structures which are very visible and which are enacting a whole series of abuses. And often theatre is the site of those abuses because there is economic censorship as well as political censorship. I mean, how has this played out in terms of your work and what you'd like to see moving forward in terms of trying to make work in a climate of where nationalism is effectively a constraint on the work that needs to be done and that you want to do?
So actually, I think we are all facing these waves of conservative thinking all over the world. the nationalist parties are appearing almost everywhere, in every country. We know the cases of political pressure in Poland, in Hungary, and in the last years I could observe this kind of pressure in the Romanian system, and what is really important is to fight for these places as places for debate, because we live in this era. You spoke about this time when the fast reaction, the how do you say, the polarized discussions are everywhere. So I think theaters and cultural institutions should fight to keep these spaces for the debate, and to give this feeling of safety, because I think what we lack in this moment is this feeling of being safe in the world in many aspects. And all this anxiety of the society, you can see it in the way the people vote, in the way the people take action. So how shall we, I don't know, heal this society in order that people think before they act? And I think that's an important bit, that theater should provoke thinking, and from thinking to I don't know, to be together in an action. So yes, we were facing, and we are still facing, this conservative wave, and we are very decided not to, I don't know, to give up. Yeah.
I'm going to invite Szucs to come in, but it's really interesting. You're talking about the rise of the right. I often think about the fact that the right gives answers. They may be fake truth answers, but they give very decisive answers. You know, I remember with Brexit, you know, we will have 350 million more for the National Health Service if you vote for Brexit. We will have there were lies, but they said the rhetoric was a really decisive series of answers, false answers, but answers. You know, and I think, how do we confront the idea that people want answers, even if they're lies? They want those answers. And is it about a failure of politicians, you know, to give, or the left to give that reassurance to a populace, or to provide answers that they feel are credible?
I would just want to add very briefly. I think the pressure comes, the political pressure comes in trying to take out of the theater some subjects, and that's really important now. How to keep this place for this not taboo, but somehow hidden subjects. I think that's very important.
The place of the things that might not be said in other fora.
A place where the fake news can be, I don't know, discussed and confronted.
Yeah, Serge.
Yes, but I was thinking, hearing Janina and Heidi also, because we have a strange link with also the political issues, because we are depending about the subvention, and we have also to say that before and still today, the culture, it's like a nationalist flag for a lot of countries. Goethe Institute, Institut Français, and we have not to speak about China. We know this. And even if they let, we see the Chinese situation, they let sometimes some performances go out, before the COVID obviously, go out with some shows not very in the line of the Chinese government, because they can say, okay, so this, we have also to see ourselves. We are not really, I know, for instance, in Belgium, years ago, 20 years ago, the minister of the Flemish government gives a kind of 500,000 euro to company to be ambassador of Flanders. And even if Teresa and they said, oh, we don't like it, but they accept. So it's always in all fields we are, and it's the reason why Europe is so important for us. And we have also to tell this to Europe. We need Europe also to be a little bit protective and not so on the influence of a nation, in a way.
I think it's a really interesting point that actually the ways in which Europe, the discourse coming from Europe can counter some of the nationalistic discourse that is proving problematic and censorious on arts practices, that Europe becomes a kind of, again, going back to that idea of a space of values.
Doing what we stand for is to push forward progress, to be still avant-gardistic in a certain way. And I think taking on board culture, anchoring it in other portfolios as well is really crucial. And obviously there are certain initiatives now, like the new Bauhaus, where artists are on board. That's very great, being inspired of what was a very big inspirational moment for European cultural development 100 years ago. But we are here again today. And I think if we want to deal with the challenges and the complexities we are living in, we need to be also sitting on the table with all the challenging and complex issues and those people who are dealing with this, and not on the side just being in charge of putting on a nice performance on stage. Because I think it's important that Europe is this content and idea-driven place that we can work in, and that is open as well for driving this progress.
Involvement. I mean, in effect, you're summing up a role that is about being involved.
Exactly, and not being put on the side.
Absolutely. And obviously, you're navigating some of these issues. You're outside of the European structures, but you're engaging with the structures. I mean, how do they resonate? Some of the discussions you've heard from Serge, Janina, and Heidi, how do they resonate with the work that you undertake?
In fact, because we work in two parallel lines, let's say, we are really focused on our local work, because we think it's very important. It's very important to work for Haifa. Sadly, we are the only Palestinian theater in Haifa now those days, so it's very a big mission to do it. But at the same time, we want it as a group to be an international group that touring and talking with audience in all over the world. And then we were also all the time afraid how we can do it, how we can do the two together without losing one of them. Slowly we understood that actually the only way to be international, it's actually to be more local. It's to go deeper and deeper in your locality until you understand its basics, the basics of it, and then start thinking how you can talk with this human being, and we talk with this any person. Then if you can find it, then there is meaning of international, because why it's important to watch a new creation from a different place. There is a huge difference between talking about someone or hearing someone, and it's very different definition about when we watch an international creation. In my eyes, a bad work about a different people, the other people, it's about when you start to talk about them to make your audience feel safe and comfortable with their situation in Europe. The good international creation that can create a question in front of the audience, not about the situation of other places in the world, it's about the audience tonight in this hall. So yeah, and on the other hand, like thinking about locally or nationally, it's still there is a way to do the two together in a way, and I think it's also important way to look at the international situation.
And the things Janina and Serge were talking about in terms of the kind of challenges that particular political regimes may place on artists, that we are working in a climate where money comes with conditions, and sometimes they're very direct conditions, sometimes they are less direct, but sometimes they are a form of censorship.
Absolutely.
I mean, how do you navigate that?
Like we at Khashabi Theatre, we are totally independent. Independent, that means different than the situation in Europe, for example. Independent, that means that we refuse to take any Israeli money. That means that there is no any possible way that they cut the money from us. So, but we cut it already because we don't want it. So it put us in a place that we have more freedom. But for example, before we started, like before we opened the physical theater, Khashabi, I was working also in a different theater. So I did a creation called the Parallel Timeline, and it was about Palestinian political prisoners in the Israeli jail. Israel closed a theater because of this play. They tried to stop the creation. The theater refused to do that, and a huge storm created. And then they absolutely closed the whole theater. So yeah, at some time it could come into this kind of censorship. The problem that we find and that we understood, it's when this censorship turned to be inside you. Yeah. This is the hard way, and this is what we wanted to do, to be outside of this danger, to be outside of this game at all, and to take the responsibility on what we want to do. Yeah. And in fact, it's not just a political statement. It's absolutely artistic statement because it's human and it's also artistic in a way because it puts you in a place that you need to choose carefully which project you want to do. You need to choose because you know that making a new project, it's not an easy mission. You're alone. You need to find your partners from all over the world. You need to work hard to do it happen. And then you need to be very carefully choosing your project and putting all your energy and love inside it. Then we feel that it's absolutely healthy also in a way.
But it shows the power. We say, theatre, it matters less, or the fact that a government will close down a performance shows how important that performance is. You don't fight over things that don't matter. Absolutely. The fact is that they felt that this performance in your theatre was important enough to be shut down.
Yeah, but it's important to mention something very important. It's just right that sometimes one performance could create something, but the real effect of theatre, it's not on the play or on the creation itself. It's about how we produce theatre. Yeah. It's about from where we take money, how we use this money, and why we use this money. It's really about production and not about art in a way, because art can be a bad thing sometimes also.
But I think the point you make also about how we internalize censorship, and that goes back to a point Janina was making, that I'm going to invite Serge in, that the idea is that when you are faced with censorship around you, how do you, without knowing it, internalize those politics? So you censor yourself as artists and say, no, we won't do that because that might offend people. Yeah. And it becomes almost an unconscious process. So I think that's also something we have to be really mindful of, these factors that will shape in ways that we can't always control what we see as a priority and what we don't see. And I thought that was a brilliant example. Serge?
I wanted just to say something because probably not a lot of people has seen also your performances. And I think that what hit me the most in Avignon when I saw a musée, it's that you succeed to give us more questions than certainty. And this is incredible because you are in a very special situation in Haifa, but even with this, you didn't give really a kind of reading really certain. No, you give us a lot of questions, and this is because we need more questions today than certainty. This is the most important thing that we have to do.
Yeah.
And actually, it takes me back to the topic of international theatre. Because when we work, we choose at the beginning of the project if this project is a local creation or an international creation. And we do both of them, and we put the same effort and time on them. But sometimes you feel that you should touch subjects and questions in a way that they are very local, in the way that you are talking with, in the way that you address your people, your audience. It's a mission of the theater that we love to do. And sometimes we feel that we are touching a topic that that we would love to ask about in all over the world. And then it could be an international creation. So the definition, it's really on the first question. not on the way that we put it on stage finally. And then it's go. Of course, it will affect everything. But yeah, I don't have any reason to come and talk with audience in France or here in Malta or in any different place in the world just to tell them about my situation. It's not interesting. Not for me, not for them. I'm here to challenge them, to ask them important questions that they are important for me, and I'm sure that they should be important for them. If not, so why we are meeting?
But in terms of those questions, how does it shape what you do? I mean, when you're developing, it's really interesting the point you're saying you're developing work for local audiences, then for international audiences. No, obviously, local audiences will be able to pick up a whole series of cultural references. I was thinking about this in the play we saw last night, where, really important cultural figure in Malta, and looking at the reception in the theatre, you could see people nodding at certain points because it was a shared cultural reference. Yeah. And so how does that affect the way you work on the ground when you are, and do you ever create something for a local audience that you then adapt for an international audience? So talk us a little bit through that process, because it's a fascinating process.
In fact, the way that me and Khashab Ensemble work, that we start from research, we start from questions. So the creation itself, it's a result of that process, let's say, and it's usually very long. So at the point that we start a project from a question that they are relevant to a local audience, the whole project will design like this. I can't say what is the basic difference on it, but of course, it's theater. It's about how we create the rules of meeting with audience. Of course, there is a lot of codes, language, important metaphors that they are clear for our audience. But it's not just that. It's again the question of why you are touching this topic. It's what you want from your audience each night, and then it's the basic difference. But we are very very extreme in that. Until now, we didn't, when we choose that it's local, so it's absolutely local, and we have some creations that they are not just local; they are local, and they will not move from our space. Like they are that much local. They can't move from our place. So it's it's the beginning, how you look at your question, it will change and affect the whole process.
There's a clarity there that I think is really admirable, that you're really clear about that, incredibly clear. At a time when people are often hedging bets and say, oh, maybe I might do that, I think your clarity is fantastic. Tell me a little bit about, you're somebody who works, you've just been talking about the work in Haifa. What does Europe represent for you? We're here talking about European theatre and what theatre can do for Europe. What does it represent for you as somebody outside of?
I had the opportunity to stay in Europe, and I chose not, actually. Not because I feel, let's say, that place for artists, it's the first resource. It's where you feel that you can work and why it's important for you to work. And also Haifa, it's a very beautiful city. It's a very beautiful city. But in fact, I'm waking up each day asking myself why I'm doing this hard work called theater. And when I thought about leaving Haifa, I stopped finding the answer, It doesn't mean that we are working and we are progressing in being an international company. We are touring Europe almost half year each year. But where we would love to create, it's absolutely in a place that we feel that it's important that we are working there, and then the place in a way gives us the freedom of asking our own question and again going more and more locally, because it's the only way to find the human being. It's not if you think on the eyes of the other, it's if you really clear your vision into your own, let's say.
It's really interesting because it takes us back to where we started in the idea of the local and where you ground the work. I wonder whether we might just look at what Heidi was talking about, networks and the importance of networks. And obviously, for your work, there's also international collaborations. So be very careful about how you select them, and I mean, and international collaborations will facilitate particular kinds of work and processes. But I wonder about how we engage with one of the things that the young people were asking, which is, we talk about the climate change and doing something, but international collaborations will involve often flying. How do we navigate the tensions involved in making work with other people from other cultural contexts and thinking about audiences in those contexts against the challenges of, a heavy reliance on air travel that will facilitate that, but that is simultaneously destroying the planet? How do we think about our working methods moving forward? Because it is going to be something we're going to have to grapple with. We can't just say, yes, let's save the planet. I'm about to rush to the airport. How do we do it, colleagues? How did we arrive here? Exactly.
Realized we can't cut off ecological sustainability from social sustainability and obviously also economic sustainability. So this is a holistic way that we look at, and I mean, it's been written down in the SDGs from the United Nations. This is now discussed very widely, and I think the questions for us in our practices, in our justifications of why we are also coming to Malta, I think that why we all went on the plane, it's the only way to be inclusive. And the imbalances that we've seen there, studies that have been coming out, it shows if there is not made a certain investment into those movements also in this way of working, then this is not helpful to our sustainability on global level either.
Yeah. What about you two? I mean, how do you grapple with those kinds of issues in terms of some of the tensions involved in juggling multiple responsibilities? As artists, I mean, you alluded to it really well, the multiple responsibilities and questions we have to ask ourselves of the work that we do. How do we prioritize it?
Well, I think, as I said before, all these problems existed and you kind of knew about them. And the only answer is to find creative ways how to keep the mobility. And I think the mobility of thinking is the most important thing. We found, so we were in our houses during the lockdown, and we still found ways to meet each other. At some point, it can become very frustrating to meet people on Zoom, but still it's a sustainable way to avoid and you can take the train. I mean,
although not to Malta.
Well, to Malta it would be maybe a boat at some point. But I think maybe more important than how do you say companies traveling, it will be the concept traveling and the thinking, the way you think about theater. And I really admire what you say about working for the local first. Because if you work for the local first, this will irradiate for sure. And I think that's our principle, the first thing to do. In another way, I just want to react to something that was said before about international cooperation and international meetings. As I'm also working abroad with different institutions or companies, I think for me, entering the world through the eyes of my collaborators gives me another perspective and in a way a good distance so I can see better my own local problems. So this movement from being very close to the community to whom you belong and having a distance and working internationally and meeting other people and doing research, because I'm also working a lot with interviews, going into archives and meeting people. And I think that's the best thing in our jobs, performative arts, to be in contact with reality. Because otherwise, if we'd be closed in our small atelier, it wouldn't, I don't know, it wouldn't...
But
make us.
it's really interesting what you were saying, because in many ways that process of interviewing, archiving, is about asking questions in many ways. You encounter material, you ask questions of that material, which aligns very strongly to what Bashar was talking about. And I love the idea of the concept and the thinking travelling, because that's about sharing. In order for that to travel, it has to be shared. And there's a process of communication in that sharing process. Serge?
Yes. First of all, about this topic of sustainability, we have to say that we have to transform, and this is a long process, and I think that we have at the beginning of this process. But secondly, that we are not the worst sector, because industry is before, so we have not to flogging too much, because if we can, you know, if he cannot travel, it's terrible for him. If, I don't know, Faustin Ligné-Coula from Congo cannot travel, it's the end. So we have also a little bit to think about this. We have in the beginning of the process, I think that a lot of things that we have done, we will not do these in the future. For instance, to go somewhere in Hong Kong to do 2 shows, 2 evenings. I think on this kind of things we have to think and to organize a tour a little bit more in a clever way. And third, some of theaters who made already an evaluation about the impact, they found that it's more, I think it was in Dresden, or yes, they found that it's more the audience. It's more the audience that come to the theater, and the impact of the movement of the audience is very huge. But this is also linked about the communication in the city and so on. So I think we are interconnected. We have to think about these. We know that in all, and especially, for instance, I think German theaters, when we build huge scenography, which material, how we can reuse them. So the topic is really complex, and we have to think about these. And it's an ongoing process. It's only the beginning, I think. And we have probably to see this in 2 years and to make a balance on what it was made. And also the last thing is, like Heidi said, sustainability are the 17 goals of the United Nations. And the 17 goals, it's not only climate change, but it's also gender balance, also economic equity, and so on. So we have also to focus on these 17 goals.
There's a lot to do. Heidi, I mean, what role can the ETC play in this? Because one of the things that Serge was alluding to is time. It takes time to be able to think about priorities and also to share best practice. I think that, for me, is one of the things that ETC is already doing. But how do we learn from things that maybe, that we think that's really happening brilliantly at a local level? How can we share that so that we're sharing best practice on ways forward?
Well, that's exactly what we do with a lot of various programs, publications, formats, and coming together. And also what Janina was saying, in being there to learn from different practices. And I think not only has the digital revolution accelerated the way how we perceive and learn things, but also that's a common challenge that we all share, and that brings us together to really put our, to speed up in making sure we are all arriving somehow on this train to grasp this new knowledge. But also what we try as a network is to generate new knowledge. Because I think maybe it's not a coincidence that the Commissioner has a portfolio of innovation, research, culture, education, and youth. because that's what we cover in each production of a performance, in each collaboration that we as a network do. It starts with research of ideas. It starts with developing this together collaboratively. Then we test it, we co-create it, we share it. And this is bringing all those new knowledge then into the European communities, into your local communities, so that it's enhancing your work. And it gives distance at the same time, but also new perspectives, because it's nourished collectively. So this is what we do. This is what we have also scaled up, because it's been becoming very apparent how important it is. It's been confirmed by our members. There have been demands and also very good ideas also coming in. And I think networks are there to stir those ideas, to help also Europe bring ideas to be this content-driven, value-based place where we can talk about this, where we have input for our minds. I think a few years back when we started working with Ars Electronica, Gerfried Stocker, its artistic director, said, we need content for our machines. And it's the theaters who are an important partner to help us find and create this content. And I think this is what we're doing and what we continue to do.
Before I open things out to the audience, Bashar, you know, we're talking about what potentially the European Theatre Convention can do in terms of sharing practice, nurturing. What networks do you feel are useful for you in your own work and practice that you think we could learn from, or that you would share things that you have learned with us here today?
In fact, there's something in what happens in the last 2 years that that is absolutely positive. Let's say, maybe the problem that we felt, all of us in the whole world, created something of gift more importance on talking together. Like it was really the first time that I feel that someone working in London facing the same problems, and that we are really working at the same theater, let's say, like we're doing the same. I believe in natural networking, let's say, and we all know that you can speak about creating a network or reaching people and speak with them, and it's not working all the time. It's what really I feel that it's about. Meeting, absolutely, and I really want us to be careful when we are talking about some topics like digital or like less traveling. There's something in what we are doing in theater. It's the basic of it. It's the meeting. It's all what we have. It's all what we have, and. It's the meeting. It's to smell each other, to feel the warmth of each other, to be here,
to breathe with each other,
breathe with each other. And I'm feeling, of course, we can take a lot of positive things from what a lot of people tried in the world last 2 years. But there's something we are touching, the basic of our work. It's really the basic, and I think we need to be very careful with it. Theater survived all the history, a lot of pandemics, and people get used to come back again because it's about meeting. It's our basic. The different now that we have this option of meeting in a different way, and it's killing the in my eyes, and it's of course just my point of view, but it's killing the main thing of theater, to be here and now together.
I think it's also that point of the encounter, that meeting, but there is an encounter that happens, whether, you know, it's thinking about how we engage with an audience, how we engage with each other, the thrill of the live. I mean, Lorca defined it as duende, that there is something that happens that just is a thrill about being in that live space together. And I think I really felt it the first time I went back into a theatre to be next to somebody, you know, luckily it was with masks on, but that sense of the unexpected, you know, it feels more controllable on Zoom.
Exactly.
And in those digital spaces. But there's something about the thrill of that unexpected, of not quite knowing, which I think continues to be a real raison d'etre, and communication.
Yeah, of course. We were talking about the tempo of different tempo of making theater or making, and it's our work. It's about. It's very primitive. It's just come here, guys. We are here together. You're welcome. You're coming, and you're watching us. And if we lose this primitive connection, I guess there is. It's the only magic that keep theater relevant, because we all know that why still audience watching theater, not movies, because there is magic. Just yesterday he was talking about the angel that crossed the stage, and it's really why people are coming, and we are in these thoughts, we are touching the main of them, and I really think we should be careful.
So a sense of caution in terms of we should be careful. Let me open things out to the audience. Colleagues, comments, ideas, where do we go? We have a mic, I think. Do we have a mic? Yeah.
Hello, Marko Bratuš here from Slovenia. I have you touched briefly polarization talking about the future of Europe. I think that's one thing that we should think of how to address it, because we always kind of start with our own vision, our own points, but within this world now that we have vax, anti-vax, left, right, Israel, Palestine, we always take position, but from a humanistic standpoint, like Janina said, yes, even the guys who hate the refugees are afraid for themselves. So fear is a basic human emotion. So how do we deal with that? How do we open up and actually talk to all humanity, not to just local audience? So how to avoid the taking sides within this polarized world?
Yeah.
I mean, this is one thing that I think we should probably think about. Again, not just taking positions.
Yeah, yeah. I think it goes back to that point yesterday around in-betweenness. You know, there is so much which is around you are here or you are there. You are with us or you are against us. And it goes back to the point Tony was making yesterday about that in-betweenness. I think it's in that in-between space that so much of the work that I think is extraordinary is made, that asks profound questions about why people align to left or right, to extreme left or right, or why people align around these algorithms of conflict. Colleagues, any thoughts? It's a big question.
Yeah, it is a huge question.
It's one of the big questions of our time. This is where we need the politicians here.
I think I'm coming back to what I said about creating a safe space for debate. And when I say safe, it's really about even physical integrity, if you want.
Yeah.
I was working 12 years ago in a city in Transylvania where half of the population was Hungarians and the other half Romanians. And in the 90s, there was a huge conflict coming from nationalist, both sides, nationalist waves. And they killed each other on the streets. It's just beginning of 90s after the revolution. So I came back in the city 20 years after and did a performance. Before we even started to perform, there was a huge tension in the city because people really had very different, opposite ideas about what happened. Our ensemble was formed of 5 Romanian actors and 5 Hungarian actors. And when the audience came, they were mixed, Romanian and Hungarians. And they came and seated in the audience could sit in a round, and they took opposite sides. And what happened is that the first one who laughed, who had the laugh, created an atmosphere of more human space. And what happened is that the show had 2 hours and the discussions afterwards, immediate, immediately after, or another 2 or even 3 hours. People needed to confront each other. And they said that if they would meet in families, in a restaurant, they would never touch this subject because they were afraid to confront. But in the theater, after 20 years, they managed to speak to each other, even friends who would never touch this subject in a private. So I think theater, I'm giving this concrete example because it's hard to explain really how to create this safety space. But I think, I don't know, we shouldn't avoid putting people with different positions together, but we should just be very aware how we create this safe space where the freedom of speech doesn't, how do you say, hurt anybody.
Serge, did you want to come in? And then I'll invite another comment.
Yes, because a society should be made by people that are not thinking the same thing. We forgot this because today with the social network, we think you are my friend, you are not thinking the same. No, but the society, it's full of, we in this room, we are not thinking the same thing. And it's good. And we have, and the place, I think I was very touched about what Janina said. And I was thinking in this time, and probably you too, I received a lot of emails and letters from spectators complaining or even telling, oh, we are so happy and thank you. A lot of letters. I'm sure that you received, all of you. And I'm thinking it should be great also to send all these letters once to ETC and to see what's the signification of these. But sometimes you said, you know, my ticket office 2 days ago, she said me, Lina, she said me, but it's incredible, but people has so many time, so much time to write letters, long letters. And this is probably because today you don't write to a politician, yes, or to write to insult him, but you have no contacts at all, so you feel that audience need a place where to be able to discuss and to have a contact. It's the reason why I answer to all these letters, because in this time it's terrible, but it's really important. And this will say that all places, the safe places, are so important.
That goes back to the point of responsibility. I'll invite Bashir to come in. The idea of theatre, the responsibility that we have to ensure that there are those kinds of safe spaces for discussion. It goes back to a point, Declan Donnellan made a very good point a number of years back about the difference between sympathy and empathy, that Trump is based on sympathy. You think like me, you're okay. Sympathetic. Empathy is recognizing the difference and not killing somebody because of the difference or throwing them out, of finding a way of living with that difference and trying to understand that difference is empathy. And we are a society drowning in sympathy and lacking in empathy. Bashar?
In the question was, you used not taking a side, and I think it's impossible. Theater, it's about taking a side. It couldn't happen without taking a side, and that's what makes theater sometimes very bad also. Theater and art could be evil. They are not all the time a good thing, you know? It depends who is making them and why he is making them and who wanted to be this made. And we know from the history examples about theaters and creation and art that just wanted to make leaders looks good, let's say, in the eyes of people. But theater, it's about taking a side, and not taking a side. It's actually taking the other side in a way, let's say.
But isn't it about how you take a side? Antigone takes a side, but
course.
It's about how you take that side and recognizing the different arguments.
Absolutely, and then it's when we're talking about artist, or we're talking about programmer or artistic director, the question it's when what we need to do is to give the opportunity to all the sides to be if not, this is the problem. But it's not talking about how you take a side on stage artistically, finally. But we start working from our beliefs, from me, and if not, I can't make art in a way.
Yes, but we forgot always. You spoke about Antigone, but we forgot always that in the play there is also Ismen who said to her sister, "No, it's life, it's people. We have to love."
Took a side.
You can also. I prefer Ismen than Antigone on my side. So
it's a really interesting one, and I think I prefer Antigone to Ismene, but that's the importance of our humanity, that we respect those different points of view and that they are informed by life. You know, I prefer Antigone to Ismene because I have relatives in mass graves that have never been buried. And we also need to recognize how much comes from our own lived experience and the ways in which that processes and shapes our judgments and our perspectives. I have another.
I would just like to follow up on this issue that has been talking about taking sides and about what I feel is the fallacy of envisioning safe spaces as being places where dissent has no place. And that is absolutely wrong. And for me, it's really hard when I see on the same phrase, when we talk about oppositions and the polarization of society, if we put vaxxers versus anti-vaxxers on the same level as Israel versus Palestine. We have to agree to a basic set of facts, which is truth, science, basic human rights. Because if not, there's no conversation possible. It's not about us not taking sides, because quoting the great Lin-Manuel Miranda in Hamilton, if you don't stand for anything, then what do you fall for?
Does anybody want to comment to Rui's? It's a great point.
Yeah, but I thought it was, for me, it was quite obvious that you cannot, I don't know, when we speak about offering a space for debate, it doesn't mean that we agree with things that are unacceptable. I mean, for me, you're absolutely right.
Okay, we're going to have one comment, and then I'm going to read two audience questions out for everybody. So, two live-streamed audience. So we'll have this comment here, and then I'll read these out.
Hello to anyone. Just a small comment, as we are, and my company, working on Antigone right now. And George Steiner has this Antigones over, and just to comment on taking sides or not. During the Nazism, there was he speaks, he writes about an Antigone version where that was used to celebrate, enhance Hitler's ascension. And as Antigone confronts Creonte, the crowd booed Antigone because she was challenging the power. And this is how extreme the subversion or the power of taking a side or not can do for a maneuver. So it is absolutely, I agree, it is vital that you take sides, and I agree when you say, but you must be very aware of the way that you want to do it, so that you can set the basis for an encounter for public debate.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to the point earlier around responsibility, that whatever you do, you need to take responsibility for it, because in effect, running a theatre is running a public space where you bring people in, and we have a duty of care to the people we bring in. Bashir, did you want to comment on that? You were nodding.
Yeah, what they are doing, that basically you are trying to design what people think about life. It's a big responsibility. But then the question is who you are and what you want. A French director that made Othello by Shakespeare as a Muslim man. Yeah. So what you want to say to the audience? There is no Othello in France, for example. And now it's an important question, and then it's the question why and what you want from audience. If you want them to feel okay with this situation, you will do something. If you want them to make a revolution, you will do something. If you want them to be with war, and then you will do something. It depends who you are, and we know it's our diversity, and it's how history will be created. Then
let me read out a couple of questions, because I think these.
I think that we can also do another debate about Antigone.
Oh, yeah,
yes,
we could.
It's wonderful.
We could.
Because today, with the radicalization of everybody think he is Antigone, but it's the reason why, I don't know if you know the poetry of Ritsos, Ismen, it's really great. It's very, so.
We could, and maybe that's a discussion. Maybe that's a discussion for another ETC, you know, because I think there's a lot of Antigones being staged in the world because it asks a lot of really important questions. And it goes back to why certain texts stay with us. I mean, we know it has to do with cultural capital, but it also has to do with the fact that they raise issues that we still think are pertinent. They function as springboards for discussion, and theatre has always been a springboard for a discussion. A couple of comments from our live stream audience. One is from London. In the UK, we're finding audiences are less and less interested in digital theatre. Now theatres are open. They want the magic, as Bashar said, and are saturated with screens. Yet the rise in digital theatre has done amazing things for accessibility. How do we keep making digital works exciting to reach new and diverse audiences? That's a small question. We could be discussing that for the next hour, couldn't we?
At least.
Some brief comments. How do we do it?
I guess if yes, there's two ways. Or we share archives that they are filmed well, and then it's the importance of watching an archive, an old creation that there's why, or that we create new creations for the digital that they are not theater, they are more into the video and the movie section, let's say.
Sorry.
I think the answer is the same answer you had for your local audience, because I think for the digital audience, they don't want to be
Unknown?
No, anonym.
Anonymous.
Anonymous.
Thank you. And I think you can create digital performances where the audience has the feeling that they are meant, that there's like an interaction, and they have the feeling that this is made for them.
Yeah.
So that's the same thing. If you just are sending and streaming something out to someone somewhere, I don't think that would be so attractive.
Yeah, yeah.
Go on, yeah.
Short reaction. The question comes from London, right?
It does.
Okay, so I think it's another subject, a huge one, but it also puts the question of money. Yeah. Who has the money to do a good digital product? And then you will have the segregation of independent, very limited budget artists and huge structures. And I don't think it would interest me, for instance, how would I make a better digital product? It would interest me, how can I make a better theater and more connected to the audience? I think a lot of streaming that was done and a lot of online distribution was very important in the beginning to keep, it was a desperate way to keep a dialogue with this audience. But, and I think there are a lot of experiments that we can use. Theater always used technology, it's not something new. But coming back in this meeting, I know when the first shows after the theaters were closed, the first shows where people went and when actors entered on stage, they were very, very emotional. And I think we realized that it's impossible to give up this. Theater, it's about thinking and emotion. And yeah, we can make better digital products if we have the money and if we are interested and if we know to whom we want to address it.
And if it's a participation, it's that point you were making about participation.
Yeah, if we choose to do.
Yes, and also I think there was a lot done over the last 1.5 years, and it's now time also to take stock of where we are with this new knowledge, how the new practices, and while we will be, for example, doing a study on seeing where each of the theater is at this journey now also, and what are the conclusions to go forward. Are we going to keep digital spaces and stages at the same time? What are the costs implied, the resources to make it also good, and what are the new aesthetics that come along, the new practices? So there are many questions, and just doing everything simultaneously is just not possible.
But I think that point you make about taking stock, you know, thinking about it is a really important one. Looking at the landscape, thinking about it. We have
Yes, I want to say that I find the question that directs us in a very simple answer, but it's not so. There are a lot of answers. During this period, for instance, I had an artist, Ismail Saidi, he wanted, we had to cancel the performance, and he told me, no, we have to do it absolutely online in streaming. And at this same moment, it was in January. In Belgium, all the companies said, no, streaming, it's horrible, we don't want to do it. And he said, oh, no, nobody is doing anything. I want to do it in streaming. And because his performance was Muhammad, it was another audience, an audience that never come in the theater. And we play 4 days, and he has every day 600 people watching. So the question is simple, the answer is not so simple, and we have to think about. Sometimes it's a good connection for some audience, for other not, and
it's complex.
It's complex.
It's complex. Before I finish, there's one, I'm going to invite you to come up with a comment, but I wanted to bring in our second live stream question, which is, it sometimes feels like European artists are the second thought in these discussions. How can we bring them in earlier? How can we protect and encourage them to address these complexities and not just, as you said, I think, Bashir, as a nice performance on stage?
Yeah. Yesterday we was talking about that in the small meeting. I think what theater organization should do now, we artists, now I'm talking as an artist, not as a theater. We understood that in the last 2 years, organization needed to act fastly. But artists needs time to understand what changed, not organization, just. And I think organization needs to give this opportunity to the artist and needs also to take some risks with the artist, because what happens in the last 2 years was questioning again our basic element of theater, is how we meeting the audience. We see masks, people are afraid to come. Sometimes there's distance. It's not something that we can forget. It's something that changing the theatrical event. And this is not just a production question or a media question of how we bring people. It's absolutely a theatrical question for artists, and I think this is what I hope that artists get the opportunity to think about.
Do either of you want to comment on it at all? How do we bring artists in earlier?
I'm not sure I understood the question. To bring it in earlier?
To the discussions about the complexities around performing work. So it's not just about putting on a nice performance, but bringing them into the dialogue earlier.
Well, I think that's the basic role of an artist. I wouldn't know what to comment more. I think that's why an artist is doing art, because he has to say something about the world he's living in. Let's say as a manager now, I'm not speaking as an artist, I think a challenge would be how to make these artists meet the communities in these difficult times. And I think here we have to be very creative. Like, we really need to have young artists, how do you say, in a very direct connection with people. Because again, if we stay in our small rooms, nothing good will.
Goes back to the point Bashar was making about encounter and meetings. Before we finish, one thought from each of you. Where do we go? One final thought. Where do we go? What do we want to do? Heidi and her team are putting things together. Let's give them lots of food for thought. One quick thing before we finish. So, well, Serge is pointing to Heidi.
No, I was just, I was on your question before, a former question, because as a manager like Janina, so I feel in this time, in this last month, that on the one hand, you have an audience that wants very happy things and on the other hand, the artist will suffer a lot. They arrive with projects, very heavy topic, the end of the world and so on. And this is very difficult to find a way to connect both sides. This is my first reflection.
I think, and it goes back to that point of connectivity. How do we connect? What are our priorities in connecting? Janina.
So I will jump from your observation to this, how do we see the future? Saying that actually I'm not afraid that theater will disappear, or I don't know, I'm really not afraid. Theater survived, but I'm wondering what kind of theater will survive. And I think the pressure of very commercial theater, the pressure of some people who imagine that the audience wants to be entertained, because not all the time, sometimes yes, sometimes they want to be provoked to think. So I'm wondering what kind of theater will survive. I hope, I don't know, there will be place for everything, because I have nothing against commercial theater. What I am against is this, how do you say, commercializing, and I don't know if this is the proper word.
It is.
So, and also I am wondering in which world we will do theater. And I think both questions, they have to go together. In which world, in which reality we will make theater, and what kind of theater will be necessary for this reality. And I think the reality really changed. We are not even aware of how many things changed and are still changing. There are still, I don't know, I feel we are on this moving sands. Yeah. And anything is possible. Anything good could happen. Anything bad could happen. Yeah.
So it's a very precarious situation, yeah.
It's interesting, I would say.
Confucius said that.
Yes, everything is in front of us, and we have to decide, because we are speaking about sustainability and our role in this. And that's to decide as human beings what world we want to live in, and as practitioners, as theater practitioners, what kind of theater would be necessary for this world.
And how do we make it?
And how do we make it?
Bashar.
I think like a good future comes from going against what this last 2 years asked us to do. Is trying to be in all the ways that possible more together in a way, and sticking into this basic that we have in all the options, and more co-productions, and working together and watching each other and hearing each other more. I think I see it as really the future, like to be in the opposite side of being more together in a way.
So together and listening.
Yes.
And yeah. Heidi, I'll give you the final word.
I think it's been made clear by everyone. We need more of those common meeting spaces with audiences, with artists, with makers, with policy decision makers. And that's something that comes back like again and again. We've had this in other settings with the first European Theatre Forum as well last year. And I think what's really important, and our proposal also to Europe in this conference on the future of Europe, is to put those proposals into practice, to use the tools that policymakers have, to drive forward to create those encounters, that the European Theatre Initiative doesn't stay just a word on paper, but that it comes to life in the years to come. That we have a stronger sector that comes together to have those kind of talks on all levels, but also that we are not just talking amongst ourselves, but that we are part of the discussions with the colleagues in innovation, in research, in education, in the youth departments, and in the wider spectrum, and that this is considered and maintained. So I think it's on the agenda, and we have the young people backing this and going in the streets as well. So I hope there will be something that comes out of this.
Well, I think, just to finish off, can I thank you, Heidi, Janina, Bashar, and Serge, and to all of you for your questions and your comments, and a call to action. Let's end with a call to action. The young people told us, and it was a really nice way of ending. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.